Hey everyone, this is day 20 and we're talking about punctuating complex sentences. So, subordinating conjunctions are a little different than fanboys or conjunctive adverbs because rather than acting as an isolated connector, they are firmly attached to the dependent clause. They are part of it. Okay? So, let's use some old conjunctions that we've already talked about to demonstrate this. So let's take two fanboys. Let's look at but and yet, okay, and look at how these function in sentences. So if I had John practiced his putting, but Todd worked on his drive, if I flip this around and leave that conjunction but right where it is, right in the middle, the sentence doesn't really change. Okay, so I can flip it around and say Todd worked on his drive, but John practiced his putting. Or if we wanted to go in, yet the store wasn't open, versus the store wasn't open, yet we wanted to go in. Again, we don't really have too much of a change. Same thing with the conjunctive adverb. Okay, if I do, I love ice cream, however, Sheila prefers candy bars, or Sheila prefers candy bars, however, I like ice cream, we don't really have much of a change. In all of these examples, the meaning of the sentence remains unchanged. Now, I will admit up front, there's a couple of exceptions to that. A word like therefore doesn't really pass this test, and it's still a conjunctive adverb. But that's kind of an exception. Okay. In general, we see this with fanboys and conjunctive adverbs that, they don't really affect the meaning of the sentence too much if we flip things around. Now, conversely, let's look at subordinating conjunctions. So let's take two subordinating conjunctions like until and because. And let's do the same thing. Okay, so we cannot begin the game until the rain has ended. Now, if I try to reverse this and leave the subordinating conjunction right there in the middle, watch what happens. The rain has ended until we cannot begin the game. It completely falls apart. Like it leaves it, we look at this and it's like that. Wait, what? That doesn't even make sense anymore. The meaning is completely screwed up when we do this. I love Huckleberry ice cream because it has the best flavor. It has the best flavor because I love Huckleberry ice cream. That again, the meaning of the sentence changes as though my love for it somehow affects the flavor. Like like I'm the cause of the great flavor. No, that's not what the sentence is trying to convey. Okay? So with complex sentences, the meaning changes or fails to make sense or implies a possible change whenever we reverse the clauses and leave the subordinating conjunction in the middle. Okay, now, with these examples that we started with, okay, so with the originals, we cannot begin the game until the rain has ended, or I love Huckleberry ice cream because it has the best flavor, we have to understand that a subordinating conjunction is firmly attached to the clause that follows it. Okay? So this doesn't mean that the sentences cannot be altered, though. While we cannot move the subordinating conjunction from the dependent clause, we can move the entire dependent clause. So instead of saying we cannot begin the game until the rain has ended, we can say until the rain has ended, we cannot begin the game. Or instead of saying I love Huckleberry ice cream because it has the best flavor, I could say because it has the best flavor, I love Huckleberry ice cream. That's a totally acceptable change. Okay, we can do that, right? But what we can't do is we can't switch the clauses and leave the subordinating conjunction in the middle of the sentence. Okay, it's got to stick with the clause that it's attached to. Otherwise, we run the risk of completely changing or losing the meaning of the sentence. So, if we use the dependent clause to begin a complex sentence, we must put a comma after it. This is the grammar rule. Okay, so notice this in the two examples that I just showed you. We're deciding, in this case, to start the sentence with the dependent clause until the rain has ended or because it has the best flavor. in that case, notice how there's a comma after those dependent clauses. Okay, so if we begin the sentence with the dependent clause, or we use the dependent clause to start the sentence, we must put a comma after it. That's the grammar rule. Now, a note on subordinating conjunctions versus conjunctive adverbs, because sometimes people get confused. They start to mix these two things up. So, you've probably heard the old saying about commas. Just put a comma when you hear a pause. This is not how we determine when or where to place commas. Okay? However, that old saying, to be honest, it's actually pretty helpful when it comes to determining whether you're dealing with a subordinating conjunction or a conjunctive adverb. Okay? Because there's always a pause after a conjunctive adverb. There's never a pause after a subordinating conjunction. So, very quickly, while you should never use the pause theory as a way to just generally determine when there's a comma. Okay, now don't do that. Okay, that's bad. However, for a very specific situation, if you're not sure if something is a subordinating conjunction or a conjunctive adverb, then and only then does the pause theory actually have some merit. Okay, that's the only case where it's like, all right, do you hear a pause? If it's a conjunctive adverb, there's a pause after it. If it's a subordinating conjunction, there's not. Okay, so let me just show you an example of this. I'm going to take these two sentences. They're the same sentence, but in one, I'm going to use a conjunctive adverb to connect the clauses, and in the other one, I'm going to use a subordinating conjunction. So I'm going to use therefore the first time, and I'm going to use because the second time. Listen to the difference in the sound. The people are leaving from the stadium early. Therefore, the game must have been a blowout. Versus, the people are leaving from the stadium early because the game must have been a blowout. Okay, notice there's a pause after therefore. There's not a pause after because. Okay, so that's kind of one thing that tells us that, hey, up here we have a conjunctive adverb, therefore we punctuate it this way, semicolon, conjunctive adverb, comma. And down here, we don't need anything because this sentence is starting with the independent clause of the people are leaving from the stadium early, and the dependent clause finishes it up. Now remember, if I had started with the dependent clause first, I'd put a comma after it, and then I'd go into the independent clause. Also know that you can use subordinating conjunctions to fix run-ons and comma splices. All right, so here's an example of a run-on followed by a comma splice. The day was wonderful, the sun was shining. Run-on. The day was wonderful, comma, the sun was shining. Comma splice. Okay, I have all sorts of ways of fixing this. I can do comma fanboy, I can do a conjunctive adverb, I can do a semicolon, but I also do have this fourth option now. I could, if I wanted to, and again, it's just a stylistic thing, I could use a subordinating conjunction. The day was wonderful because the sun was shining. Period. Okay, that works as well. Okay, so that is everything for punctuating subordinate clauses. Just remember, the dependent clause comes first, put a comma after it.